Today is Tuesday, August 13th. This is the regular meeting of the Rhinebeck Central School District Board of Education. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the July 30th regular meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Any changes or all those in favor? Okay, motion passes. Public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to reports and discussion. We have our annual school data report. Ryan Krebs. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Hopefully this is I made it so you never know. A simpler version than the report that you saw that got included in your packet. This is my attempt to synopsize that data and narrativize it a little bit to make some sense out of it, hopefully. If not, you'll let me know. Hopefully you can see this thing better than that thing behind me. I was going to use that, but it's grainy and then you all had to get up and move. So we'll try this.
Thank you.
You could also move that closer to us if...
I don't have my contacts.
Oh,
in.
I
I
really
am
can't see.
prepared for that eventuation because I am under the same.
Ocularly
glasses
challenged.
for that, though. I go like this.
Yeah, don't let the
Would you like
glasses
me to
deceive
move it
you.
closer?
I'm good. I'll just speak for myself.
So far, so
far?
good.
Clear.
So far, so
So
good.
far, so good. Numbers, and we'll tell you.
Okay, when you see data slides though with numbers
Right.
on it,
Yeah.
if I see you all
You see
leaning
that?
in like this, we'll come close. Okay, so this is sort of a combination of 17-18 and 18-19 because the sequencing kind of got messed up because of the way the State Education Department rolls out the data now. They used to, in the far off days, release student information from the data warehouse at one time in the form of a school report card, and we kind of got into a schedule following when that report card release happened. Over the last, say, 3 to 5 years or so, increasingly up until last year, they have a sort of rolling data release of information and accountability throughout the whole school year. So there's never really a moment in which all the information that we need to do an analysis of the report is available to us in any given calendar year. That said, I've kind of created a workaround so that as of this year, I am capable of getting all of the high school, that is the secondary information, squared away in the summer right after that June, and then all I'm waiting for is the 3 through 8 data, which I'm told from the state they're going to be giving us early in the fall. So I'm hopeful, and I think this will work out, that we'll be able to start a cycle where this information will be publicly available in one form, either through me at a presentation to you, or whatever, however you prefer. Sometime in the fall. So I'm thinking somewhere later in the fall, maybe October, November-ish, right in that range. And then we'll be able to kind of give a synopsis of the previous year earlier on in a school year. Hopefully that'll work out. I would also like to, if it's possible, start the pattern of, at the curriculum committee level, sort of going through all this information with that group as a subgroup first, get that in the regular order of the board so that there's a report to the board in advance so we can kind of process this stuff together. I think if you didn't notice anything else, you noticed in that report that I sent to you is that there are just gobs of information being generated about the school district. And without context and background, most of it is just meaningless numbers on charts, tables, and graphs. And that's not just you, that's me. I see those reports and I, half the time, have no idea what those numbers mean. I have to call up friends at State Ed and say, please explain to me what that number is, and why it's there, and so on. So I'll do my best to sort of be a translator of that here and kind of tell you what I think is the situation for the district in terms of the student achievement position as we stand today. That's kind of what I'm going to try to do. So, as all of you know, but I understand there's a couple of new board members, so I thought I would just loop back a second, remind, just for sake of context in talking about the student achievement data, is that this school district is based on a sort of mission, vision, core values approach to managing curriculum instruction and assessment and a variety of other things. And that may sound kind of high-minded, but there's a lot of different ways to think about strategic planning and how you might go about constructing an academic program. This district years ago decided to use this kind of an approach so that we wouldn't get ourselves in a situation where we were just solely using test scores and metrics and data to evaluate the quality of our programs or the learning of our kids, and that we were actually kind of aiming a bit higher than that to think in terms of things like, you know, helping kids meet the challenges and opportunities of their future, helping kids develop skill sets that would serve them well as they graduate from high school, to get all kids ready with the skills and knowledge they need to graduate from high school and meet the challenges of whether that be post-high school vocation or college or military or whatever it may be. And that we were going to do that in the context of shared values that we all committed to. And these values have kind of gone through a variety of iterations over the years. But we always loop back to, these are kind of the core things that everyone, when we really sit down and start talking about it, everybody really cares about. So in the context of doing planning around student achievement data, where we're in a system where there is standards, assessments, and accountability that's quite narrow, we always want to talk about that in a larger context. So we also think about this from the point of view of a comprehensive district plan. And so this district at this time has 3 broad goals under academics and achievement, student climate and social emotional development, and professional development. So we've kind of developed that, and that plan runs out through the 21-22 school year, and those goals are in the plan. And so these 3 goals form the frame, if you will, of the plan itself. Now, the idea behind this thing, which was kind of, it's a difficult process to manage, because it was decided as we were doing this process that we were going to engage with all of our stakeholders, and that is we were going to fully involve not just representative samples of the professional faculty, but we wanted to make sure that everybody that was involved in setting goals for the district on the student achievement side, or the professional development side, or the school climate side, that they were going to be committed to those goals too. That this wasn't a subgroup of people going off in a room somewhere and setting goals and then coming back out and telling you these are your goals. You were going to be involved in setting the goals. You were going to be involved in the process of implementing those strategies to meet those goals, and you were going to be involved in evaluating whether or not you were meeting the goals or not, and then you were going to change accordingly as time went on. That was the theory of action, if you will, behind the plan with those 3 goals. And so these 2 major statements about all K-12 students, personnel, instructional programs, and so on, were going to be involved in the process, and that we were going to set mechanisms in place to monitor the progress of every student toward these goals that we had set. And so this is sort of a visual representation of how that works. So mission, vision, core values across the 3 areas, and then the objectives were written into the plan. So if you were a math instructor at the secondary level, those goals were written by math instructors at the secondary, so you were involved in that. I didn't write those goals. They did in collaboration with the administration. Okay? Okay, so in the context also of talking about educational assessment, I'm going to give you numbers based on how kids did on tests. You have to kind of put a context to that. So I always like to talk about educational assessment, which is, it's kind of a special form of an evidentiary argument, and it's really reasoning from a handful of things that kids do, and it's particular things, and not too many of them actually, to sort of say, well, okay, can we cast a broader set of valid and reliable inferences about what kids know, what they can do, and what they have learned or accomplished as a function of instruction. So educational assessment is kind of a broad area, and it's quite technical, actually. It involves an important set of variables to determine, validity and reliability. So I'll talk about some of that as I go through the numbers. And there's a my button that I want to work with. So why do we do all this stuff anyway? Well, I can tell you there's really kind of two different kinds of assessment that are given. There's summative assessment there in that bullet in the center, and then there's formative assessment. So those two types, formative is really what you do as an ongoing sort of set of evaluations in a classroom. You might think of those as, chapter tests and unit tests and things like that in a classroom to monitor student learning so that you can see if they're learning and then adjust instruction along the way. Whereas summative assessment is really end of some sequence of instruction. Some would argue it's end of course instruction or assessment. Some would argue that it's summative, like Regents exams at the high school. Algebra 1, say, would be the first math test that a kid would take in the high school after going through, K through 8 math and then 1 year of Algebra 1 instruction, let's say. So that first test might be a summative assessment for how much math the kid had learned over the course of those many years. So it's those are two broad concepts that I kind of keep in mind while I'm evaluating numbers that come from the state from these tests that we have the kids take. So, and we use it for a broad range of purposes. We're trying to figure out whether individual kids, programs, whether the instruction that's being delivered is all affecting certain groups. So is it the all student population? Is it kids who are students with disabilities or English language learners or economically disadvantaged kids? So you use all this assessment to try to take a look at those kids and say, well, how are they doing? And are they responding to the type of instructional program as well as we would like them to? And if not, then that kind of goes back into the planning process where we feed this information back to the principals and the teachers and say, hey, these kids didn't appear to do very well last year. What's up with that? Is that a cohort effect? Are there kids in that group that really struggled or whatever? So you can kind of see that we use these assessments for kind of a broad range of things. The state education department has expanded that out some to include things like holding schools accountable for how kids do, individual teachers accountable for how kids do on state tests, and principals accountable for how the kids in their schools do through the annual professional performance review process and through the accountability system. I'll talk a little more about this at the school level. And we'll get in more, I think, as time goes on over this year, particularly in the next time you see some data from us about the new accountability system. And that would be in that document that you got sent, the first probably 10 pages or so of that. That is the new accountability system. And that's sufficiently complex and arcane and full of lots of, if nothing else, it's like a vocab lesson. It takes a long time just to learn all the terms that they use to define this or that. So I thought maybe we'll hold off on that a little bit, other than I'll give you the broad picture of where the district stands in relation to those accountability formulas. So there's a lot of, how do you describe it? It's a heavy load on educational assessment now because of the way the education system is set up, for better or for worse. And I think there's some controversy around whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I think it's important just to set that as a context. So, so just backing out all the way back to 2013-14 and then up to 17-18, the reason you don't see 18-19 is because, as I mentioned at the outset, the 3 through 8 test results aren't back yet. What happens is the kids take the tests in the late spring, and then those tests are scanned into a system, and the raw scores are that is how kids did on question 1, question 2, question 3, how many points they got on the constructive response and the written portions, and then all that is sent for scoring. And so the kids got some number of points out of a total possible. That's the raw score. But that's not really where the scoring takes place, because then they take the raw scores and convert them to standard scores. So there are equal intervals between every interval on the test, and then add one more layer of accountability to it where they create what are called proficiency cut points. And typically, this is in most cases, not totally all, but in most cases, that means they put a cut point for level 1, a cut point for level 2, a cut point for level 3, and a cut point for level 4. Low being the 1 being the lowest score, 4 being the highest. 3, the cut point for 3, would be designated in most people's minds as passing. So anybody who's 3 and 4 is passing the test, quote unquote. So these numbers here represent in 17-18, for example, 68% of the kids that took that test in grade 3 that year passed the test with level 3 or above, and then so on and so forth. 56 in 4, 45 in 5, 50 in 6. Grade 7 was 43, and grade 8 was 49. So you can kind of see over time, it has sort of drifted up. The problem with this slide is if I were to actually create a slide, I tried it once, to show you what's happened with the test package over the last 10 years, it's changed so many times that you really can't draw a lot of longitudinal conclusions, because they've just so, for example, since the time I've been in the school districts, the standards that have been used have changed 4 times. The test package that's written against those standards has changed a commensurate number of times in manners like they test for 3 days, or they test for only 2 days, and they add some questions in one section and take some questions out. And so the tests are always changing, quite frankly, and so it's hard to make too many generalizations, that is, inferences that are reliable and valid from the results year on year. And so it takes a sort of what we like to call a multiple measures approach. So what's actually happened behind the scenes here is, I was just talking to the elementary school folks about this today. All the kids in the elementary school are looked at across a variety of metrics about, classroom performance, how the kids did on maps, and then these tests become just a part of that picture and may not even carry the day, because it may just be that the test doesn't make any sense. So added on top of that, you have some kids who refuse to take the test. So we have a certain percentage of kids at each grade level who are afforded the option in the state of New York to refuse. So now when you look at, let's say, any one of these grade levels, you don't know which kids or how many, maybe I should start including that, didn't take the test, so you don't know whether, so for example, if 10 kids didn't take the test, there may have been 10 kids who would have passed the test with a 3 or better, but they're not in the sample because they didn't take it. It's that kind of stuff that we're dealing with. So we kind of have to now go back, figure out who didn't take it, go look at their classroom performance, and then try and say, okay, how would they have done, and determine whether or not they need support services or not, and so on. So, I don't mean to make this overly complicated, but that is what we're dealing with in terms of this information. So bear with me as I kind of walk through this, because I think you'll see a picture that I've tried to paint, and the same picture seems to hold in this school district over time. And that is that, I don't think I need to tell you, and we don't need a child psychologist sitting here telling us, that kids develop asymmetrically. They don't develop according to the age and grade system, year on year. They don't learn an equal amount in each year. Some years they do better than other years. Some years they leap forward. Some years they kind of hold back a little bit. So what ends up happening is when they take these standards-based tests, which are based on grade level standards, it is assuming that a child has learned everything they were supposed to learn in kindergarten, learned everything and remembered it, learned everything in first grade and remembered it, learned everything in second grade and remembered it. But that's not how kids develop. They tend to consolidate their knowledge over time as they accommodate and assimilate new information. And some kids, it takes time. Our observation has been to not overly focus on this kind of stuff, and instead to teach the curriculum as best we can and let the test scores sort of be useful for analytical purposes, but to watch the long-term summative picture much more closely. And that's where we'll get to in a second. So you can see this is how it looks in 3 through 8. In math, it's quite similar. If you see over time, it kind of jumps up and down. The highest generally in this new test package is around 65. We end up somewhere in the 50 to, sometimes it even drops into the 40s in grade 8. So bear this in mind that the kids are kind of all over the place as they come up through on these tests. I only throw this slide up here because I'm trying to make a point, which I think is important, and that is that generally speaking, the special education kids who take these tests struggle to meet grade level standards. I don't think I need to tell you that because I'm sure you're intuitively kind of aware of it in most cases. They get referred to special education, they're given a battery of tests, it's determined that they're not performing like their grade level peers, and so it wouldn't be surprising if they took a grade level test and didn't do well on that. As a matter of fact, we would be kind of flummoxed by that if we went through a whole process based on our referral. We put them with our school psychologist and evaluate the student. We determine with all of our horsepower intellectually that this kid is in fact special ed, and then the kid goes out and takes a test and performs equal to or above his grade level peers. That would just make no sense in most cases. And it doesn't happen because our diagnostics are pretty close. So we're not surprised that of the kids who took this test, and again, I'll just randomly pick one, which is grade 3, in that particular cohort of 50 kids, there were 14 kids who were labeled special ed. Only 7 of them took that test, and only 2 of those 7 passed. So, and the other 7 didn't take it. So, and I could go through the rest of these and sort of talk the same way. There's not that many of these special ed kids generally. It's not always true. Some years you have an anomalous group of special ed kids that do particularly well, and we're thankful for that. So that gives you that idea. The same things with math. We end up with the same pattern. But the gen ed kids generally outperform those kids, and that the numbers for the gen ed population are always slightly higher. What I typically do just to try to keep track of these kids is we create a chart that looks like this. So we have an all-student population, and then we break that group down into subgroups. We general education, students with disabilities, in this case American Indian, we don't have any of those kids, Black, Hispanic. You'll notice that there are asterisks in some of these cases. Those mean that there are kids there, but there are not a sufficient number of them to report because it has to reach a certain threshold before we're allowed to put them on charts. So you can see that white kids, and then of course they're broken down by female, male, and English language learners. Again, the same thing is true. We don't have enough kids to be recorded in there. But the point is that, again, just to make the point, the general education kids tend to outperform the special education kids, which accounts for some of the variability in the scoring for proficiency in grade 3 grade. That's the main point. And the same is true of math. It's the same kind of pattern. You can see in 4 and 8, science, generally speaking, from 13 to 14 to 17, 18, we run in the high 80s to this last year. It was 100% of the kids in Science 4 and 94% of the kids in Science 8. So we feel pretty good about that, and it seems like it's, there we go. So you can just kind of see that this is a chart that shows that, just to give you a longitudinal look at what that looks like at grade 4 across the grades. So I'm running pretty high right now, which we would expect it to be. Okay. And then Science 8 is the same thing, which is a different way of looking at the same chart. 94% and 17, 18. So this is sort of the down and dirty chart, I like to call it, because I just like to look at this to say, well, okay, so what's the big picture here? So you can kind of see that if you were going to say, well, I wanted 100% of these kids to pass every year, what's the gap? So you can see these gaps are quite large. There are quite large gaps between all kids scoring at the level 3 and 4 level at each grade level, all the way through in ELA and math. That is not true in science.
Marvin, can I stop you for a second?
Please.
So being proficient in 3, 4, do we know 1, 2 and the breakdown there of those kids that didn't pass? Are they close to a 3? Are they closer to a 1? Like, where do they fall on that scale typically?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the the answer is yes. I have level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 percentages, and then I also have their standard scores as they pertain to those cut points and how close they are. And generally speaking, the last time I did that analysis, because every once in a while I just dip in to look, we have a large number of what we call high 2s, which are not too far from level 3. Usually it's around 5 to 10 who are within 2 or 3 standard score points. Now here's the thing about that. One question could be worth 2 or 3 standard score points or something. So you're talking about kids who might, if they miss 2 questions, they're just below the cut line. And there are, like I said, it's somewhere around 5 or 10 kids right around that area. And then there are a predictable number of kids who, if I walked into any classroom and I asked the teacher which kids are going to score level 1s, they already know who those kids are because they're kids who have, significant learning challenges. So yeah, we do know that, and that becomes the object of interest of our support programs, because if you think about it, those kids, if given maybe just a little bit of extra help, can make a lot of progress. And so our AISRTI program in the elementary school and middle school look at that data and then say, oh, what should we do with that student? What kind of support would help that student at least grow another year in school? So that becomes important information. Yeah. Sure.
Can I ask you to back up just to explain something? Go back 2 slides, I think we'll do. Keep going.
4?
One more. One more. Sorry. Yeah, okay. In
One
looking
more.
at the,
One more.
well, it doesn't matter, this,
Okay.
this works too. In looking at the students with disabilities, for example, in grade 7, there's a 1. Does that mean there was 1 student with a disability who took that test in grade 7? And then what does 14% mean for proficiency if it's 1 student? 14% of that 1 student? I just don't understand what that means.
I do understand what you just said. And the answer to that is the same answer that I just gave in the previous slide, which is, if you remember, there were 2 kids who were special ed kids who passed the test, and they constituted 26%. Well, the reason is because that's 1 special ed kid who passed, and that 1 kid constitutes 14% of the special ed kids.
Who took the test?
Yes.
Who took it?
Yeah, that's all.
Okay,
And the reason I do that,
got it.
it probably makes your brain go, what? Why do you do that? Well, the reason I do it, I don't know if it's a good reason or not, but it is why I do it. I want to know, kind of comparison-wise, how these subpopulations do who took the test compared to their group. So what percentage of my special ed kids passed the test? That's what I want to know.
Right.
And I want a down and dirty quick look, so I can just go, oh, 14%, okay, got it. Now, I know that there were, in that case that I was just telling you before, there were 14 special ed kids, only 7 of them took the test, so I know that. So but I just do this for you so you can see what percentage of that population scores proficient.
Thank you.
So,
Yes, absolutely. It wasn't that 1 student took the test, it was that 1 student got proficient, but it was more students took it, so I just
Got it.
missed that.
Marvin, before
No, it's okay.
before you move on to high school,
Oh,
2 questions for you. I'm wondering if when you look at this data and so you bring it back, you go through the principals and they go to their staff, or how do you who do you
Yeah.
review it with when you do it?
well, so it's kind of a variety of things, because we're organized by principal and grade levels in the elementary school, principals and team leads in the middle school, and principal and chairs in the high school. It tends to fall into those categories. So everything gets run through the principals first, and then we provide information to them as they request after they've looked at it and talked to their people about it. So typically what we do is create a little care package for everybody over the summer, and then shoot it out to everybody so they've got it. And then we get some teachers who will reach out to us and say, and ask us more detailed questions once they look at the big picture, and then we'll send them directly that kind of information.
And as part of that review, looking at how we do across the state, I mean, it's important to look at the cohorts and how they're doing, but I think comparing how we're doing compared to other, fifth graders, third graders.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you, I broadly construe that. In other words, because I have, as a matter of fact, if you want to ever look at this, if you just go to data.nised.gov and go there, what's going to pop up on the screen is the entire state. And so it'll show you how many kids are in the state, and it'll show you a bunch of demographic information, and then you can click on districts, and then you can go to Rhinebeck, and then you can look at Rhinebeck, and then it'll show each of these groups as it's compared to the state average on grade 3 ELA, for example. So then we look at that kind of stuff. I have not put a lot of stock in it because of all that stuff I was telling you about the test in terms of comparing. I'm more interested in how the kids are doing in terms of mastering the curriculum as they get ready to go into the high school. So I've kind of stayed locally focused. And then I let the state accountability system snag the comparative data, because that tells me how we're doing comparatively, because the way they set up these metrics is, I'm going to simplify this super a lot, but it's close to what they do. They take all the kids who took a test in grade 3, which happens to be in this state, I think it's around 300,000 kids. I think it's 100,000 kids at grade level. Yeah, so that's 300,000 kids roughly. And then they get a score from that, and then they stack rank everybody. So you know where you stand percentage-wise compared to the whole state. So they kind of divide that up according to level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. So if you're in the 4 range, you're in the you're above the 75th percentile. If you're in the 3 range, you're above the 50th percentile, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I snag that without spending a lot of time on it.
Okay.
I mean, we could, because we have troves of this information, do a lot of this cross-district analysis if we needed to.
Okay.
I tend to use it, and again, this is just my bias, because I'm the curriculum director. I tend to look at this from that lens, and then also with the support people to make sure that the right supports are in place so the kids are mastering the curriculum, to try to determine, because you're basically, I think I mentioned this in a future slide, but you're basically in the process of doing your analysis, you're trying to rule out instructional and curricular problems for what kids are doing in class. So if it's an instructional or curricular problem that you control, you should do something about that, right? So I'm always trying to rule that kind of stuff out, so I don't do a lot of that comparative analysis. But if we could, if the board thought it was useful.
And then
I was just going to say, is that what we look at in Forecast 5, this data through that lens, or is it separate data?
No, I think it's the
It's the
same
same
data,
data.
I'm pretty sure, yeah. Yeah, when we look from district to district, this is their
Right.
ELA and math totals that are out there on the SED website.
Mhm.
So from that fashion, yeah, that's coming from one source.
Yeah, they should
Because it's
include-
this data that they're
Right.
sucking into
Right.
Forecast
Yeah,
5.
right.
And that's one thing we can do, is we can go back, look at 17, 18, just to make sure our numbers match up with what Forecast 5 is. Because we know sometimes that isn't always the case.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
well,
I can't say
it's on
on-
a little bit of a lag too, like it may eventually match, but there's data, because again, the way this data gets released now is it rolls, and these third-party companies that pick this data up and put it in their databases, they don't get it until it goes live.
Right.
They don't touch it, so, and then it changes, so there's a lot to that. And see, when you get into this comparative thing, you have to remember to compare apples to apples. There's an awful lot of disaggregation that has to occur before you can even make a reliable and valid statement about like how you stack up. So like every once in a while, I used to do that just out of idle curiosity more than anything, and I would look at our what I used to perceive as our competitors, like Scarsdale, Jericho, Burlington, Byram Hills, who else did I used to look at?
Haldane.
Roslyn, districts like that, and just kind of see. And it depended on the metric, how we did. we tend to underperform in 3 through 8 compared to our cohorts, and we tend to be comparable as we get into the high school level. That's my general observation. Just my take on it.
So,
do you want to say something?
yeah, so I just have a question. So, just to use 3 to 8 math assessments as an example. So, I think we could all agree that the percentages of students who are taking the test and scoring 3 or 4 are fairly low. I mean, they range from 41% to 60%. And, you know, we mentioned that, you know, the curriculum has changed, the tests have changed. Do you think that if we, I know this is a stretch, but if we were to be able to keep the standards the same, say for 10 years, and the test format was to stay the same for 10 years, and we could get roughly all the students to take the test, would we see these numbers increase? Or are they gonna, do you think they would stay the same?
That's an interesting question. We've tested that theory once. We did it through the NCLB years. And you may recall that they had set a proficiency target of 100% proficiency by 13-14. You remember that? It gave us all quite a chuckle back in 2000. However, what ended up happening here was because what a lot of school districts did, because they had this pernicious accountability formula through, you had to make AYP and your AMOs, and we don't need to talk about what all that stuff is, but we used to have to do that. But what we did here was we thought, you know, you can't wait until, you know, 2011, 12, 13 to start making progress, because that, we call that the balloon payment. You know, you're not gonna pay up early on. You're gonna get to the end and you're not gonna be anywhere near that. So how we kind of tested that question is over time, because they left the thing stable for a time period, our scores went up, so that those numbers were quite high by the time we were done. So I would reasonably expect that we would get that trend line. Would it hold solid? You know, would it be a logarithmic climb? Probably not. But my baseline numbers sort of looked on a chart, and I charted it like this year on year. Every year the baseline across the board was a little higher, a little higher. So you make a good point. If they would stabilize the system and stop changing it, you know, that's one of my mentors over time that I've read a lot. His name is Richard Elmore. People complain about public schools and say they don't change enough, and he said that's really not true. They promiscuously change, and that's the problem. If they stop doing that, it could give us all a chance to consolidate. And here's where it's particularly pernicious in the research that I'm conversant in. Kids who have a hard time mastering curriculum are particularly disadvantaged by all this turbidity. It's really hard for them to consolidate their learning anyway, and when they encounter new standards or different ways of thinking, it's hard for them to adjust, and they kind of get behind and they kind of never catch up. So I think that's a point well taken.
Marvin?
Yeah.
Sorry,
Oh,
one more,
please.
sorry.
That's what I'm here for.
So this data from Chancellor is older, so you've had a chance to kind of go through it with Mr. King. Do you have any concerns based on this snapshot of data? Anything? I mean, I know you were talking about, like, sometimes when you compare, we're a little behind in elementary and then we catch up.
Yeah.
Is it any of the programs that we have, or is there any, you know, in any particular grade or anything that's concerning?
Yeah, I would say the areas that are in need of attention and growth in the elementary school are in the area of writing. I think we've started working on that together. Like, we're starting doing some work in the area of writing. Mr. King and working with Lucy Calkins' work on the units of study, and we brought in someone from Dutchess County BOCES to start working with them. So what's interesting is through our analysis, we noticed that, wow, we could actually make a lot of progress if we solidified our writing program. So we feel really good about the reading side of those literacy units that we built, but we think we need to do some growing in that area. Another area that I think is important, not really a concern of mine, but I do think it's going to pay off in the end, and that is switching to big ideas math with the full elementary school faculty being fully committed to doing it. I would say that in everyday math, everybody did it, but I don't think they were all fully committed to it, and so I'm anticipating seeing over time some dividends from that. And I think those are two areas that I'm most concerned about right now, and we're putting some energy into those things to try to buttress them a little bit, like professional development and stuff like that. I mean, another thing that this isn't a concern, but this is a real opportunity that's staring us, and we're going to start working on this, is the science program in the elementary school is going to go through a transformation over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. It's going to look totally different in probably 3 years, because we're going to roll over to the next generation science standards, and it's going to be a lot stronger and a lot deeper. We just started working with someone at Dutchess County BOCES, and Barb Recchio, and Barb's coming in and helping them develop these things called live labs, and there's going to be a lot more hands-on science in our elementary school classrooms across all sections when we get finished. It should be in a couple of weeks. So those are areas that I see that we need to do some growing.
I have another follower in the elementary school.
Please.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, when, on the report that we got in our board package, it's very clear that the boys are doing poorly compared to the girls, particularly I think it was in English. So I was wondering if that's something that is addressed specifically, or if that is the nature of the beast, so to speak. Because what happens is that the girls do so well that when you look at the total count, it isn't as bad, but for this one, I mean, the boys are at 37%,
Sure.
The girls are doing 50, and then it evens out, but it's, I was wondering if you guys talk about that.
Yeah, we haven't really spent a lot of time thinking about that, other than from the perspective of thinking about the tasks that we're asking kids to do and doing a better job of matching that up to their interests and their motivations. So we're trying to think about that differently, and that's across all populations of kids. So thinking about how they see themselves in the curriculum. So that's called the mirrors approach. If you look into the curriculum, do you see yourself in there somewhere? And I think we've got to think about that more. So we're trying to do a better job of matching what we ask kids to read. That's boys, girls, whatever population we might be dealing with. So I think we deal with that more generically, not directly.
Mm-hmm.
But it may be worth bringing up. There's nothing wrong with talking that kind of stuff out. We're kind of thinking the same way, interestingly enough, about the girls, because in the area of science, tech, engineering, and math, there's a sort of whole theory out there called the sort of windows and doors theory of that, where if girls don't see themselves in those fields of doing that kind of thing, they're less likely to do it. And if there aren't entryways for them to get into that discipline like science or math, then they don't tend to bite into it and stay with it over time. So that sort of opens up a whole way of thinking about curriculum for everybody, really, is how to access curriculum. And that's really part of differentiation, which we try to do as a basis for everything that we do. But that's a challenging proposition, honestly. But it's an interesting question. I'd be happy to bring it up and just ask, see what Brett thinks about it and see what the teachers think. So let's jump to the high school. So now you can see, so now everything changes. Kids get into high school, they're in high school courses, they're older, their knowledge and skills starts to consolidate a little bit. They're taking what is a high stakes exam. I mean, when they sit down in the chair in their 9th grade and they're becoming the member of a cohort, now they're earning Carnegie units. They have to pass tests in order to graduate from high school. So all of a sudden everything changes. And you'll notice that over time, that is the pattern here. So if you look at our 18-19, so this is sort of hot off the presses this last year, but 98% of the kids passed Algebra 1, 100% passed Algebra 2. And I can just tell you that in Algebra 2, back when I first started here, we'd be lucky if we could get 68% of the kids to pass that test. I mean, it was that difficult of a test, and that we've adjusted and kind of moved with the curriculum, and so we've done a pretty good job helping kids be successful. And 100% of the kids passed geometry. I would just pause to say Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry, those are 3 quite difficult math courses in our high school for a high school kid. When I first got here, if you looked at the high school set of courses that were offered, that thing looked like an electrical diagram of possible tracks that you could go through. And I'm not kidding. And they were all manner of what we call M classes in our high school. Well, you notice we don't have any of those anymore. And when we first transitioned over to this kind of a process, we were told that we were going to get these mass failures and that we should get ready for that because we're going to have all these kids not graduating from high school and they're not going to do well and so on. Well, that didn't come to fruition. In fact, what's happened is the opposite. The kids have played up is what's happened. And the instructors have taken this on and tried to do everything but throw the kitchen sink at it to help them be successful, and so it's working. I would just also say that Chem, Earth also did very well this year. CC, the Common Core ELA was a little lower than it normally is, but it usually runs in the high 90s, and it was about 90%. That particular group of kids had some subpopulations that struggled a little bit. The only score that kind of jumped out at me this year, well, you can see living environment, 99%, 98% of the kids who took physics, and 91 who took US. That transition global, that was a little lower, so I kind of did some disaggregation of that group, and we had about 14 kids in that group who are really pose some challenges to themselves and to the professional faculty to help them with some special education kids in that group. And that curriculum is undergoing a transformation. It'll be a new curriculum soon, and they'll be in what's called the new framework. I believe it's next year. They'll be in the new framework. So that, I think that accounts for a little dip in that global. So you can kind of see that what happens is, and I think it's important to remember that these kids who are in this Algebra 1 are the same kids that showed up on that 3 through 8 math thing that had those scores all over the place. They're the same kids. Our mobility is quite low. They're the same kids. So something happens to them. I don't know if they pupate and become butterflies, or I don't know what happens, but as the kids kind of get into our high school program, their knowledge is consolidated, they've accommodated and assimilated the information, and now they start to really do well. So
Yeah, just the 40% number in the 2017, that just jumped off the page. Global history, 2017, 40%.
Do you have kids taking both of those tests that year?
So I'm processing this in my brain quite quickly. Why does that say 40%?
I just wondered if the number.
There is an explanation.
I just wondered if the number was right, and if so,
No, I think it's right. So here's what's happening. The global history and geography, which is taught in 9 and 10, so you take global 9 and you take global 10, is undergoing a transformation to the new framework. And so we're phasing out that old exam. And so only a few kids took that test. And so 40% of the kids who took that test passed it. And I think those kids were kids who were grandfathered in, and I think they're special ed kids, if I recall correctly. But you know what, I'll check on that.
yeah, just it was so different from all the other numbers on the page.
Oh.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everything else in the 80s and 90s.
But some of these tests, and correct me if I'm wrong, when they switch from one curriculum to a new curriculum, and therefore they switch from a test that's based on the old curriculum to a test that's based on the new curriculum. We're talking about state tests and state curricula. Sometimes they provide the opportunity for kids to take either test if they want, or to take one or the other. So during that transition time, it kind of stratifies the kids. So maybe if you're a kid who's been struggling, you might say, you know what, let me just take the old test because I know that, I've taken that. I'm kind of nervous about taking the test for the new curriculum because I'm not as comfortable. So it's a potential explanation for why maybe the kids who took the last year of the old test, not only are there fewer of them, because it looks like, I'm guessing that probably more kids took the new one.
So some sort of transition.
Yeah, because, and you can see the transition there because, again, 17, 18 was the last year for the old
And
global
then
history.
it's gone, right?
Then it's gone, right, it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's what's happening. And this transition global won't be here either. It's being sunsetted in the same manner.
Great, thank you.
What the transition means, just for what it's worth, is that they've been incorporating some of the new standards in the new test. That's what's happening. So I think we can see it's a little bit of a bumpy ride there, and I think it will be until it settles back down. But that information, just so you know, so I get this information. I have every kid on a chart. I've got every item. I know exactly what every kid did. That information is turned around immediately to the department chair and to the principal, and they go to work on that. And I say, hey, here's what I take away from looking at this. What do you guys think? Let's get together and talk about this. So it gets responded to like in the summer, so that they're adjusting during the summer to get ready to come back and do this again. Okay, so you can kind of see over time, this chart is in here, and I got thinking why some of these charts are in here. Some of these charts are in here because board members years ago asked me to put them in, so I call this the Paul Slayton chart, just so you know. That's in here because Paul Slayton asked me to put charts like this in, so I did. So if you ever want a chart, just tell me. You can ask for one, and we'll name it after you. As long as it turns out good. I mean, if it doesn't turn out, we won't mention it. But anyway, you can kind of see over time that if you look at the baselines and how it plays out, overall, the Common Core ELA and math, as we've transitioned to the Common Core, has remained pretty successful. Kids have done fine, even though they're bouncing all over the place as they come up through it. That's the takeaway.
And I would mention, I'm sure many of you have read about it, there's a pretty vigorous discussion amongst the Board of Regents about getting rid of Regents exams. So, to Mark's point, if we could just let this thing be for 10 years, we actually might have some data that makes sense, and our kids might be doing better than it seems they are based on this data. That's a change. So what I just put it out there. What happens if the Regents decide this year, you know what, come 2021, we're getting rid of the Regents exams. We're not going to have them anymore. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I have my own opinion about that, but it certainly is not beyond a certainty that we're going to have them forever. And we've had Regents exams in this state for a long time. Just because we've had them doesn't mean in and of itself that they're a good thing. But my question is, so what's the alternative? If not that, what? And is there something better to use as a yardstick as to whether kids are achieving or not? I mean, you're going to read a lot about that conversation over the next several months, no doubt.
So I only throw this SAT thing up here again. It's only one metric. Each one of these just forms part of a picture that I have in my mind about how things go around here. And that is that on average, our kids score on the math and the evidence-based reading and writing higher than the state and national averages. That's the takeaway. And that's what generally happens. We administer every year somewhere around 200 AP exams. The scores of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are here down. This is the type of exams that we offered, the number of kids who took them total. You can kind of see that it's skewed toward the level 3, 4, and 5 level, which we're pretty happy about that. We have a policy here that if a kid wants to challenge and take an AP class and take an AP exam, we support that. We want kids in there. So we're not afraid to get a bunch of level 1s and 2s on these things if that happens. So it's not a metric that we would pay that close attention to, again, other than asking the instructors to look at that and to make sure that we're not talking about an instructional or a curriculum reason for why kids aren't doing well. Because those two things are really important, because you have to rule that out. If it's not, if it's one of those two, then yeah, you got to make a change. This is something to be proud of, and it's something that we have also kind of migrated into and have been very successful with. I can just tell you from an anecdotal experience that I had this year, I had someone tell me that they graduated from our high school and went into college to study an advanced science, and they were awarded enough credits that they were able to start as a sophomore because they went through our AP program and took that many classes. And so that's quite a thing, and that parent particularly, thanked me. I don't really say thank me, but I'm saying thank the school district for offering that kind of thing to his child, because that student had done very well in this situation. As a matter of fact, that student was in that group. So 19 ended up being about the same, 196, and the distribution was somewhat similar. We had a few more 1s and 2s there, but again, the same principle kind of holds. We're more interested in getting a lot of kids in these advanced courses because we think if you're going to go off to a 2 or 4 year school, you need a college level experience while you're in high school so you're used to what that's like and take on that kind of rigorous challenge. And you can see we have a lot of kids who do that. The graduation rate here in Rhinebeck High School tends to be up near 90. Sometimes it gets up to 95. This last year, it was in 18-19, it was 94% of that graduating cohort. Now, it's important to understand cohort data only, again, it's kind of an arcane area, but it is worth noting that kids become a member of a cohort in September of their freshman year. And they're a member of that cohort until in perpetuity really, but up until they graduate from high school. So we pick up kids that jump into our cohorts from other school districts. So we may get a kid who's a junior who doesn't have a lot of credits who joins a cohort because they started that cohort when they were a freshman the same year those other kids did. So I always love when you're talking to people and a wasp is flying around.
Yeah.
Because you can watch everybody try to keep track of that and see if it's going to time bomb you. It's terrible. Get out of here. All right, so you get the idea. Our 2 and 4 year college attendance rate tends to be, it runs in the 90s, high 80s. It's up past year. I think we were half a kid short of 90%. Or something like that. So it's around that area. So you can kind of see, most all of our kids pass our Regents exams. We have a very high rate of kids who take our AP exams. We have always our kids score higher on the state and national average on SATs. And we tend to get 90 to 95% of our kids who attend 2 and 4 year colleges. So if you want to juxtapose that picture with the picture of 3 through 8, you can kind of see what my narrative is. My narrative is that if kids stay with us over time, our program of study is very strong and affords them an opportunity to be successful at the post-high school. Did you have a question?
Marvin, yeah, David, do we keep track of like the other 10% or so of kids? Like, is it military, going to work, or do we have a sense of?
Yeah, we do.
Breakdown
We
there?
actually have we have post-high school plans for those kids. And some of those kids go to military or they go to vocational programs of one sort or another or wherever it may be. So,
All right, so vocational would be included.
yeah. So, yeah, we do keep track of those kids. And, which I'm super excited about, we're bringing online, which most of you know this new program called Naviance. Okay, so Naviance has this little cute gizmo that is attached to a national clearinghouse where all the colleges and universities have to report their information in on all their kids who are attending. So we're going to have direct access to how our kids are doing in their post-high school experience in 2 and 4-year
That's
colleges.
exciting.
And we have all that data available to us once we get this bad boy set up. We're working on it this summer.
I wondered about that, what happens.
Yeah, well, we've been
Great.
scratching our heads about that
Yeah.
one for years, trying to figure out how to get at that information. Because there's just no good way to do it. Everything we've tried kind of got response rates that were just dismal, is the right word, I believe.
Well, I think also over the last number of years, colleges are being required to report this data. Wasn't always that way.
Sure.
So even if we had a neat gizmo like this, if colleges aren't required to feed that data into some central repository, then you wouldn't be able to look at it. Now they are, and we can access it, so that's a good thing.
And how, current will that data be, if it's just kind of, we're just getting audience, but how old will the data be,
You have it, how far
How-
back?
how
it
far,
goes
how long has
back,
the
that's
college
a good
been
question.
reporting?
5-10 years maybe, but see, so if you hear what Joe just said, it's gonna get better and better as you get
Mhm.
nearer to the contemporary moment, right? So the guys told us, I think about 5 years back, the data's pretty good. So I'm looking forward to that, and that gets populated fairly quickly once we go live.
I was gonna say, is it gonna bring up our graduates from 4 years ago?
Yeah.
And let us know where they are right now, even though we didn't feed them that, they know where they graduated from.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I'm pretty excited about that, and I think
Yeah.
that'll help us, because I think that's the burden on a program like ours, is that we've got so many kids who go off to 2 and 4-year colleges. Well, okay, so how do we do? How are they doing? Okay, just something we could have done different. And I think that's where the real challenge is. It's the burden of being successful, so to speak, and you got to think about stuff like that, where, if we had 78% graduation rates, we'd be thinking about something totally different than that.
Well, the other thing too is we have struggled over the years to try to latch on to that kind of data through surveying, and the survey rate is dismal. People who aren't doing well don't want to tell you, you know what, I fell flat on my face and didn't do well, so you never get that data. And most of them, hey, I'm out of high school, I couldn't be bothered. But this will help us snag that data, which is great.
Yeah.
So we also, certainly, again, this is just data that comes out that's pertinent here, is that we also surveyed last year the comprehensive school climate inventory. We used these 13 dimensions, down through here, kind of break out according to safety, teaching and learning, interpersonal relationship, institutional environment, and social media. And then the staff rate their leadership and the professional relationship functions. So there are a bunch of questions on this survey that are mapped to each one of these subdimensions. That's how the thing is set up. And so you'll notice that we got they score it, it's 1 to 5, so it's a Likert scale. And then, so you can kind of see here that we had relatively low scores across faculty, parent, and student perception in the area of sense of social emotional security, social and civic learning, and social media. So you can kind of see everything else kind of tracked near that 4 level, but these clearly dip down across those 3 groups. Now, if you look at Buckley Middle School, Chancellor Winston Elementary School, and Rhinebeck High School, you'll see that sense of social emotional security, social and civic learning, and social media also came in with lower scores. So we have a pretty good sense from our last snapshot view of school climate where some of our work needs to be. So we're trying to work on some of that and disaggregate some of this information. And so we've taken a look at that, and a lot of what we're taking a look at is hopefully going to start to address some of that. So we're sort of teasing that out right now. We will not survey this year. We're going to kind of put some things in place, and then we'll probably survey the following year to see how things are going. But I just wanted to bring that into the picture, because we think that relates to how kids do in school, and it's just as important, and always have. But now we're kind of trying to do a little better job of keeping track of this data and using it for program planning purposes. So we'll be doing some superintendent's conference day work on dealing with anxiety in schools and things like that. So what's the big takeaway? Well, Rhinebeck High School was named as one of the best high schools by U.S. News and World Report, which we all know. It was named as one of America's most challenging high schools by WAPO. Our SAT scores tend to be above the state and national averages. Our four-year cohort rate is 94%. Our college attendance rate is 89%. We give an awful lot of AP exams. Your high school for 5 consecutive years was in the top 20% for achievement and progress as rated by New York State. Last year it was rated as one of 234 high schools in the state of New York as a recognition high school. And even though the scores are kind of up and down and all over the place, both schools, Buckley Middle School and Chancellor Livingston in New York State, as rated by New York State, are in good standing based on the metrics that are in that report that was so you can kind of see over time what, there's trends and strengths in the system. Elementary science is strong. Elementary math and middle school math is strong and improving. And the reason I can say that is because, again, the summative data tells me that the kids are making progress and consolidating their learning as they enter the high school. So we end up getting these pretty high scores on the algebra, geometry, and algebra 2. So you can kind of see that the results across the other disciplines tends to be good. Our IB participation is high, our 2- and 4-year college attendance is high, and our graduation rate is high. So there's a lot to celebrate here. I think the main thing that I always like to say is, look, this work is done by the professional faculty, the staff, the administration, but mostly this is kids. They should be commended for their well-earned achievements. These kids are the ones that are coming in here and working hard. So we're very fortunate to have kids who are as academically motivated and achievement-oriented as they are. Again, our SAT scores are strong. Our kids have a lot of opportunities in the arts and athletics and extracurriculars. We try to stay focused on the climate. We've now implemented a Project Lead the Way program at the 3 schools. We've now got K-5, the launch program we have in 7 and 8. We've got the Gateway program, and we now have 3 engineering classes, 2 principles of engineering, intro to engineering and design, and then we also have AP computer science implemented last year, and then we run again this year. So the point is that we have a strong program that is something to be proud of. So in terms of growing our way out as we move forward, this is just sort of Marvin's version of this. I think what we have to do is stay focused on using multiple measures and include everything. I think it's a mistake to get sort of focused on one particular metric versus others. I think we have to include a strong academic program across the board for kids because different kids have different strengths. I think we have to support and strengthen teaching by emphasizing collaboration. That is, we don't want teachers to be lone wolves anymore. We want them to be in collaborative teams and working together by setting goals and studying their teaching together and improving together. We need to always keep looking at our leadership skills to make sure that we're leading well and kind of retooling our own skills. And I think we have to keep focused on the climate. But I think one of the things that's good is we have to remember, and that's one of our core goals, is celebrate, recognize, and acknowledge success while we build to make something new. I think districts make mistakes if they start focusing on what's wrong with themselves, and now that ends up being a thing where everybody gets defensive and starts mistrusting each other. Whereas if we can see what is strong and good about our organization, celebrate, recognize, and reward that, and then grow into new things that we can do better, it's a better way to go about our work. I think with regard to response to intervention, I think we have to continue to keep putting together these support programs for these kids, particularly in K-8, because those grade level standards are challenging to some of those subpopulations, and I think that requires a real focused attention to individual kids, and I think that's something that is kind of gone on here that's kind of behind the, it's not on people's radar because you don't see it, but that stuff's going on in the background all the time. I think that's important. I think curriculum development is something that will go on really forever, at least maybe, Mark, until they stop changing the curriculum. Maybe we could help with
I think
this.
it's fair to say that's never going to happen.
So I guess it's safe to say that's never going to happen. But I do think it's something that's important, and I think it's a proud tradition here that we have asked teachers to own their curriculum, write their curriculum, partner with experts to develop their curriculum and to implement and test their curriculum. And then every year, they're asked through me to go back and look at what they're doing, submit proposals to improve their curriculum and instruction for the ensuing year. And so we've got that on an improvement loop every year. And so we appreciate your support when we do that, because we need that financial support to get them in here to do that. And then I think we have to continue to think about professional development across areas like technology. I think working with the ISTE standards, but I think it goes further than that now. I was just at a ISTE conference with Steve, and one of the big takeaways for me is that there's transformational change happening in the area of technology, and I think we need to think about computer science standards as New York State brings them on, and how to integrate that more fully into our K-12 program and make that up to scale across all sections. And I also think we have to start looking at the stuff that they're now calling artificial intelligence, but really what it is what they're calling algorithmic thinking. And I think we've got to start thinking about that more consciously and integrating that, because the world that these kids are going to inherit is an algorithmic world, and they need to understand that language. And it hit me like a ton of bricks in this one workshop. I was with this mathematician at Carnegie Mellon for a couple hours while I was down there, and it's really remarkable what's going on in that field. And there are entire countries that have that built into their K-12 programs already. Kindergarten kids are already studying that stuff. Israel for one, Russia for another. So there are countries doing this kind of stuff. New York State is woefully behind much of that, I would suggest. And so I do think it is an area that we need to start talking about, because it's a heavy lift to start to roll over to that kind of way of thinking, because it is a different way of thinking. But exciting, really interesting stuff. So anyway, that's my take on that. And now, I'm just going to really kind of, this is going to be fast, but so the new accountability system, that is the first 10 pages or so of that document that you got in your packet, is based on these 7 areas. So it's going to be based on academic achievement, student growth, academic progress, graduation rates, English language proficiency, chronic absenteeism in college, career and civic readiness. Each one of these sub-points has a metric that is tied to it, and that's where I was talking about the arcane, like you really don't want me standing here teaching this to you. But I thought it might be a good thing to do in curriculum, just so we can start a conversation about how the district is now being measured by the state, and then how we stand in relation to the state.
So Margaret, would that be something that curriculum committee would own, or something that CDEP would own? Like, who would measure those things?
I'd say it's both.
Both?
I'd say both. I think they should both know what's going on. Like, I think it's a natural conduit for you folks, so that everybody's getting kind of an update. And I think this stuff's going to have to get integrated into the CDEP plan. Like, I don't think we can leave it out. We can't act like it's not there, because, again, there's one of those, back to that balloon payment concept. If you don't stay on it early, you can find yourself in a bad accountability place at some point if you're not careful. So we're going to have to spend some time on that. So that's what I got. That's me. So you can find me.
I have another question.
Sure.
I think this is the first time I've seen the absenteeism on here. Is it because that's the new, part of the new? Do you have any sense, and when I look at these numbers, they look high, which do you think this is normal for us? Like, 617 students, 62%, 62 kids are chronically absent, 10% or more, double in the high school. So those numbers seem high to me. I don't know if that's typical for us, typical for schools. I know it's the first year it's come in here, but is that, do you have any sense of?
Well, so here's interesting you asked that, because that showed up on that accountability thing right here. And you know who showed you? You showed up at the secondary level, white kids. 12–13% below. So they were in the 86, 87 range, fell below, because they give you to 90. You get below that. So we actually got a level 1 on our accountability for that population. So yeah, that got on our radar screen quick. And now I've got to put together a little plan and submit that to the state for that level 1. So we're gonna have to start taking a look at that, because we were thinking the same thing. That seemed high.
Yeah, I mean,
We're wondering what accounts for that.
yeah, I mean, we know our tardiness is high, we looked at that before. But this seemed, you know, and in the elementary school, that there's no issue, those numbers are more,
It seemed okay.
seemed okay. I mean, there's still
But,
some-
you know, we're anxious to start digging into that a little bit, because I will tell you, if you talk to Mark Berg, he will not be surprised if you tell him that. Because
Yeah.
we talked to him, and he goes, I'm not surprised. As a matter of fact, he said to me, I'm surprised it's not worse, because we have an absentee problem. And it's a variety of things. It's families taking vacations while school's in session, disappearing. That does happen for 5 whole days. And so you could see pretty quickly. So you figure, 10% of 180 days is 18 days, right? So you got 18 days to play with. But if you take a couple vacations, you can chew up, get sick a couple of times. There's your 10%. So,
And not to go down that rabbit hole here, because there's a lot to be discussed about that, but that chronic absenteeism number is any absence,
oh,
legal, excused, unexcused, kids out for 2 weeks with a fractured leg, that goes
That
towards that
counts.
18. So you could, a normal number of illnesses or injuries is not going to push us over that number, but when you add that to 2 weeks in the Bahamas during school, now there's another 10 days. It doesn't take long for some kids to hit that.
You just need a President's Week vacation and that number will go down.
There you go. There you go.
Sure it will. Sure it will.
now that's strategic planning, right?
So that's something we need to look at. Of course, the irony is we have chronic absenteeism, but we have very good scores in the high school. Something to look at and discuss.
They're responsibly absent.
Well,
They
maybe.
get packets.
Yeah, they get packed, right.
A lot
I
of
mean, they're given the
coursework is
tools to
online.
If
keep
they're able
up.
to miss that much school, then maybe they're not. Shouldn't they need to be in school?
Do you know how much I missed in high school?
I mean, we can have a conversation as to whether that's a good and reasonable metric.
It should be the
For
other
us,
ones, right?
but regardless, it's there. We're gonna be judged on that.
So they don't break that down to
No.
different
No.
segments?
No.
It's just
Well,
a
it shouldn't
total?
be down by legal or not legal.
Right.
Well, it
It's
is.
just a matter of what you write on the note.
Yeah,
days.
well, but it is, of course,
How
so.
many days aren't you learning? Doesn't matter
That's
for what
right.
reason.
That's
How
right.
many
Right.
days aren't you learning?
Right, I mean, it's probably.
And to top it off too, the high school
It's
has
school
about,
learning versus
Yeah,
home.
it's
can't remember, 12
I was
to
never in high
14
school.
days, Regents days, where
I
they
think I missed
automatically
over
mark
80
here.
days in high school. I never been.
So,
But that doesn't count as an
I
absence.
know it doesn't. I hope so, at the high school,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
it's even worse than what you think it is.
Went to third period because I
But they
wanted
get
to
rid
play
of Regents.
sports, so I had to be in homeroom. And I just leave.
Okay, does anybody have anything else for Marvin before he packs up his tent here?
No, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Marvin.
So he's gonna be back in late fall.
Okay,
I mean, he won't present the exact same stuff, but
the new stuff.
part 2 will be in several months.
Well, it'll be interesting if they learn about absenteeism.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Marvin.
Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Okay, so now Tom is going to talk to us about the 2019-20 tax levy and tax rate overview.
Yeah, I'm gonna go over this quickly, just really in kind of broad terms as to what our driving forces to better explain it. So if you go to 6.3 in your packet is the warrant itself, which is a couple of pages with your signatures. But if we go after the signature page, yep, there, I see you right there, yep, right there.
Yep.
Exactly, right there. So flip it over to that page.
Thanks,
And
Marvin.
before we get to the wide landscape one, I want to go into the factors that really go to the spreadsheet here. So the first one looks like this. It says percentage change due to assessments. Okay? This is really your tax growth factor that you've been seeing in the tax cap numbers. And actually, this was a very high number this year. and we see that it's 1.47%. Now, this is just looking at last year's assessments, and then looking at these new assessments. So, in the town, in Rhinebeck, the village and the town, over $17 million was added to the tax rolls. It's either through new assessments due to additions, could be new properties, it could be a revaluation based on a sale, okay? So those all factors go in, and I see our big factor this year was in Stanford. Stanford grew by 4%. But overall, 1.5%, that's a great number to see. So if we flip the page over, and this is now where it starts to get, start to see some of the factors that go into this. So percentage change due to equalization rate, and we'll see two of our 6 municipalities have an equalization rate different than 100%. Last year, in 18-19, Rhinebeck went from 92% to 87%. So their equalization went down over almost 5.5%. That has a reverse thing. Your equalization rate goes down by 5.43%. Your assessments just went up by 5.43%. So the value has gone up tremendously in Rhinebeck, and we'll see this very shortly in our next slide. Hyde Park has also been in that case. They've been slowly shifting, but theirs has been a slow one. At the end of next year, though, at least 5 of the 6 should be back at 100 with Rhinebeck. Now, if we go to this other one, percentage change due to full value, and this is the biggest slide of all. If we go down to the bottom line of Stanford, I had mentioned that their assessments went up just over 4%, and we can see their full values went up 4% too. And you'll see that for everybody at 100%, but there's 2 that really stick out. Rhinebeck, the value of their town went up over 7%. And I want you to see that one number out there, $1,524,000,000 under that 1920, the second column from the end. That's the number we have to pay very close attention to next year, is what is that assessment? Because once it goes up to 100%, back to 100%, is that number higher or lower? And that will have a big difference about how everything gets charged throughout the school district. Overall, our school district went up almost by 6% in value. This is going to hurt us with our combined wealth ratio down the road. That is one of your wealth factors. 50% of your wealth factor is based on your assessments. So our assessment just went up 6% there. That means various aids will go down. Now this has a delay factor about 4 or 5 years before these numbers hit us. But over the years, we're seeing that number start to trend up again. It was pretty even, about $1.7 billion. Now that number's jumping, and now we're getting up near $2 billion. That will have an effect on our combined wealth ratio down the road. So, okay, so that being said, what did it do to the tax rate? So if we go back over to that first spreadsheet after the signature page, okay. So the first thing I want you to look at is in the lower right-hand corner in that gray box where it says full value tax rate. Our tax rate went down by 2.22% this year. Last year, it went down too. Last year, it had gone down almost 4%, almost right to 4%. Okay, so over the past 2 years, our tax rate has gone down more than 6%. But that's come at so the ones that are at 100%, Stanford, Red Hook, Milan, and Clinton, have all seen their tax rates go down for a second year in a row. Who's making, our taxes still did go up, so who's taking the burden? It's going to be Hyde Park and Rhinebeck. Now, Rhinebeck this year is not too bad, 3.39%. We came out with a tax levy increase of 3.63%, but that growth factor really did help us out here tremendously. It kept it 3.39. Hyde Park is 1.33% increase. Everybody's down 2.22%. So it does spread it. So what I want you to take a look in the middle of that first line of Rhinebeck where it says percentage full value, is really what percentage of the school district is made up of the town of Rhinebeck and the village,
That's the 78.07%.
yes, at 78.07%. So they're picking up 78% of our tax levy. If you go back a couple years, it was down near 75. So they're picking up a greater portion of it. So their taxes over the past 2 years have increased, along with Hyde Park, where everybody else, the other 4 towns have gone down. Now, next year poses a unique situation where we're gonna get, the reval has been, is in the process of being completed. So what that bottom line will have a great effect upon all the municipalities.
The reval
One
is in Rhinebeck.
is in Rhinebeck, but that reval will affect everybody across our entire district, even the other schools, because whatever that value is, if it stays at the 1,524,000, then everything should be fine. But if that goes up drastically, that means Rhinebeck will be paying more. If it goes down drastically, they'll be paying less, and the other municipalities will be picking up the difference. So it'll be very interesting to see where those play out. Hopefully, we'll get some indication well before we have to sit here at tax rates, so we can be prepared for it. I just hope it doesn't affect next year's school budget in any way, shape, or form.
Won't be
I hope
done
it
by
does.
then.
It should.
It won't
What's
be
that?
done, it won't be done by then.
Won't be done by then. They'll still be fighting it at that time. Just to let you know, we did have an uptick of tax certiorari's come into our office this year. Not too bad, but
Explain briefly what a tax
Yeah.
certiorari is.
So as a tax certiorari, there's another name for it, it's SCAR, and I can't remember what SCAR really stand for, but it's a process in which the homeowner is basically suing the town assessor for the assessment that is on their property.
Saying they're overassessed.
They're overassessed.
Grieving.
Yeah, it's also called
Past-
tax grievance,
past the
but this
grievance.
is past the grievance. They've gone to the grievance procedure. They didn't get the result they wanted, so they're going to the next step.
Going to a judge.
Yeah. so
And a lot
judge-
of that is tops, because they're in bankruptcy, so their land values were pulled down for Rhinebeck.
Okay, well, so there's a whole bunch of those type of little things going on. It isn't, hundreds of thousands of dollars, but, I don't know where they're gonna go. And I have a feeling they're gonna say, just wait for everything to be reevaluated, then let's talk about it again. But there's a couple instances, like one is now declaring, hey, we're tax exempt, we're a tax exempt organization, we don't deserve it. We shouldn't be taxed, that's one thing. And this year, I've seen an uptick in the farms looking for reductions. So that's the big thing, and we'll have to see where it goes for next year. Just to get back into the budget cycle just a little bit, if a tax certiorari or a tax assessment change goes to a previous year, meaning if right now I'm going to pay, because someone is fighting their last year's tax assessment and they win, okay, and now I need to refund them money. Those monies are going to come out of the tax certiorari reserve, okay? Next year, let's say we're this year right now for 1920. Someone is fighting it, and we get a result in this year, the 1920 school year. That money comes out of your revenue tax account. Doesn't come out of reserve, it comes out of current monies. Bottom line's all gonna stay the same, but it will decrease the amount of our revenue. So we could see us not hitting our revenue projections next year, depending upon how valuations go. You never know. I've seen them go very well, I've seen them go haywire at times. So,
How far back can they go? Is there certain?
To file a tax certiorari?
They can only
Great
do 1
question.
year.
I can't remember, you
Otherwise-
need to file it immediately. I mean, you have to file it in that year, you can't go back and say, 2 years ago.
Right.
No, you can do it for the current year, but it may take 4 or 5 years to resolve itself. I'm trying to remember one that we did a few years ago, I think CVS. CVS settled a number of years ago, but it was like a 4 years worth. Village Green was the same way. I think the old top with the Grand Union, I think it was back then, they same thing, was multiple years. So, any questions about the tax levy? If you ever have anything, please give us a call. If anybody, just to let you know, tax bills will be going out on August 30th. That's Friday, August 30th. They will be released. First day of collection is Tuesday, September 3rd. I think that's the 3rd. Yes, the 3rd. Yeah.
Through November 1st.
Through November 1st. Yes, and once again, we're doing the lockbox with M&T. We prefer that you mail it to the lockbox. If you want to do it in person, we prefer you do it M&T Bank, but you always can come to the district office to pay your bill. But we're trying to, I think we're very successful, yes, last year in addressing taxpayers coming through the building and through our students to get to our office. So it's helped out tremendously. It's not 100%, but boy, we cut it down 90%. So, and they're also, anybody who came through, we're told to come through the side door and not to go through the building, but.
Some do, and some been doing it for years, and old habits die hard.
Yeah, and some people like to walk through the school just because a little reminisce, and maybe I'll bump into somebody and say hello.
Thanks, Tom. 2019-20 board goal development.
Yep. So I did send you this afternoon, and you should have at your place there, you know, a few tweaks. Again, it may or may not be what, you know, the board is satisfied with, but it's perhaps the next step. It's really up to the board whether you need more discussion or thinking about it, or some of you want to take a stab at wordsmithing a particular goal or not. There's no legal requirement. I mean, you don't even have to adopt board goals legally, and there's no requirement to do it by a certain date or time. So we're not sitting here tonight saying you have to approve something tonight. You don't have to. You can if we're where the board wants to be, and if not, there's always September 10th.
So last, I remember discussing, we talked about adding some measurables into the second and third goals. And I don't see them here, and I'm wondering whether that is a result of your meetings with the building administrators or what?
The only one that had anything to do with meeting with the building administrators, as I mentioned in the email today.
Oh, sorry, I didn't get a chance to
in
see
response to Diane's email, was the meeting with Steve Jensen. And he and I, as I mentioned, he was actually pretty happy about that as a board goal. However, he felt that being able to do that in 1 year, given where we're at right now, was not, in his opinion, reasonable. That he felt we need at least several years to, you know, because there's training that's involved with teachers moving to one of these learning management systems. You know, so he felt that several years was not an unreasonable goal to get everybody to be using a learning management system. Currently, there's virtually nobody at the elementary school using a learning management system. There are quite a few people at the middle school, and the high school is kind of mixed at this stage of the game. So his thinking was that starting with what we have, and for example, like picking up grade 4 and 5, grade 9 and 10, and those in the middle school who aren't currently using Canvas. There are some, but not a lot, as well as the new teachers, and you know we've hired a good number of new teachers to concentrate on those areas for the coming year, and then whether we can pick up everybody else in the following year, that's a possibility. But it's not where people have nightmares over doing that, is where you say, all right, everybody do it by October, and then people are freaking out. You have to train them and you have to bring them in. So doing it in 1 year, he didn't feel was a reasonable expectation.
Maybe I'm remembering wrong. I didn't feel like we talked about doing it in a year. I felt like we talked about having the teachers come to some sort of plan to do it.
Well, Diane's email earlier today was focusing on having everybody doing it this year. So that's what I was
Gotcha.
responding to. I was responding to her email earlier today. So I don't think Steve wants to just develop a plan. I think he wants to get started.
Mhm.
But the idea that this could happen in a year is it's just not reasonable.
So my memory when we talked was to, for each grade level or each team,
Mhm.
or to decide what they were gonna use this
Mhm.
year and then start moving towards that, or,
Well,
I think we talked about getting it done this year, but, you were gonna talk
Well,
to Steve about how
yeah.
that could actually look.
Well, I think the flaw with that thinking is that you don't want this crazy quilt of people using a whole bunch of different things. I thought, my recollection from our conversation was that we wanted everybody to be using the same learning management system.
So everyone in the district using
Yes.
one.
Everybody could be using Canvas, for example.
I didn't remember it that way, but
Yeah, because I thought that was the holdup now, was that everyone was using a lot of people were using
Right.
different things and they didn't want to switch over, so that was why I thought we came up with, well, what about just, the team or the grade level, so at least all the sixth grade teachers are using X and,
right.
I
That's
thought
what I
there was an
remembered.
email that went out that was saying that Google Classroom was incorporated within Canvas or vice versa, that there was some overlap that they would easily be able to keep doing what they're doing.
Yeah, Steve told, in my conversation with him after our goal workshop, was that people could use Google within the framework of Canvas. But I'm not sure those teachers at the high school who are using Google kind of get that or understand how what they're using could fit in there. So again, we're gonna have to do some work with them. We're gonna have to do some training with them to get them to see, they don't have to give up their Google, but they do have to, our opinion, Steve's opinion, is we should be using the same framework. So that doesn't mean having different people using a half dozen different platforms. That's not his recommendation anyways.
Okay.
And I think that's even better in a way, because then you have multiple
Yeah.
kids, everybody's using the same thing. So that would
Yeah.
mean no one would be using websites, for instance, everybody would be using.
I'd have to talk to Steve about
I don't-
the specifics
But generally,
of
then
that.
the goal would be for everyone to use the same thing.
Yep. I think the goal would be for everybody to be using Canvas. We have the majority of people who are using a learning management system using Canvas, so and it seems those who use it seem to like it quite well. So Steve's inclination would be, all right, since that's working, let's stick with that. We already have a cadre of people who are using it who can help their colleagues potentially and concentrate on that. And then you have, as I said before, you have the majority of teachers in the elementary school that aren't using anything. So I think that's where the heaviest lift is going to be, is training them and working with them to explain to them why this is worth their time. If people don't feel like what you want them to do is something they can use and can make their jobs easier, essentially, there's not going to be, the buy-in is going to take a lot longer if it ever gets there across the board.
That makes more sense.
So that's Steve's thinking. It made sense to me too. So, but we can tweak that, and if coming up with a plan in this first year is sufficient for the board, we could certainly do that. Because I told Steve to start putting some ideas together for that. And like I said, we had a great conversation about it. He was gung ho. So I don't want to hold him back.
So he thinks this is something that could be done 2 years? Does
Well-
that seem right? Or like, you know, if we change the goal to say 100% in year 2 or something
Well,
like that?
again, I just want to be honest and say, he said, yeah, at least 2 to 3 years, he thought. Again, it depends on how much money you have to put into training.
Sure.
You know, because you approve them every year, and you have for the last several, we've done a lot of summer curriculum projects around Canvas. So there's a financial lift there. And I can't tell you, as we sit here today, that we budgeted $200,000 to train people in Canvas. I mean, we didn't budget any more than we do for general purpose stuff. So I don't know that we'd even have the financial resources to do that much that quickly. So it may take us a few more years. But he felt it was doable. It was a great idea. He thinks he's got the horsepower in terms of people who are already using it. He wants to, remember we have a camera on us here, okay? He wants to use the tech integration time that he has to start that training, especially like with the new teachers, to get them up to speed right away. No reason having them have to unlearn something.
Yeah.
So that's what his idea is in this first year, is to use that support to work directly with teachers, especially since that individual happens to be one of the early adopters from the middle school. That, again, without getting into any more specifics, that's his thinking.
So how does everybody feel about this goal then, as written, the third one?
Yeah, if we can add some kind of check-in points to see how things are going, you know, like last year we had Steve come in, so if that's part of that process, I guess, you know, I'm okay without it being timelined.
Well, what we could, just a suggestion, and you tell me whether, and this is for everybody on the board, not just Steve, but I appreciate his comment, we could probably add something to that verbiage that addresses a timeline for when a plan would be able to be developed and reviewed with the board. And then after that, start the actual implementation. And I don't think we'd be talking about a long time. I mean, I told Steve, I said, start drafting something. I said, don't wait until after the board adopts this. Let's get started on it, because the sooner we get that out there, then the sooner we can actually start training teachers and get the word out that, hey, this is our goal for the next 2 to 3 years, is everybody's going to be using this learning management system. So, I mean, I think we can make that tweak without,
Yeah, because I think
You
if
know,
we have
without-
that plan, and then when we come, you know, when we're talking about this in June, we can see
Yeah.
kind of sense of like, well, what did we accomplish in the first year
Mhm.
of this?
And I think to build on what Steve was saying, it doesn't necessarily need to be in the board goal, but if we plan on, okay, let's have these checkpoints to see how it's going, then
Yeah.
that'll help keep moving things forward,
Sure.
you know. Yeah.
yeah, you're right, that doesn't have to be
Doesn't have to
embedded
be
in a
written,
board goal.
right,
Just
but we just-
decide when you
we'll
want to
figure
hear
it.
from Steve at a board meeting to give an update.
Right.
You know, once in the fall, once in the spring, you know, whatever you want. I mean, you know, he's certainly willing to come to a board meeting and say, this is where we're at right now, especially if he knows ahead of time that this is the expectation, and he'll plan around that timeline. So that's easy enough.
So
Yeah.
everybody good with the last one as
Yeah.
Just one thing, in regards to that. So if we, so we're saying we're gonna take a couple of years to do this.
No, we're saying it's going to take a
It's
couple of
gonna
years.
take a couple of
do
years to do
yes.
this, to get everybody on board.
Yes.
So at the end of 2 years, if you, I'm just wondering if there shouldn't, maybe not as a goal, but as, you know, a percentage throughout the check-ins? Because I wouldn't want to wait till the end of 2 years and say, well, you know, I've got 10% on board, but there's still the 90% that hasn't been on board. I was wondering if there's some way to sort of just keep on top of it so that we don't.
Maybe that could be part of Steve's plan, like percentages.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
That could be baked into
The
his.
first year I could get 10%.
Because right now, he can probably give us a percentage of current users.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, it's not gonna be 100%, it's not gonna be 80%, but it could be 40%. I'm just pulling a number out of thin air, so, okay, if year one, you already have 40, we're starting with 40%, and we know we're bringing on new teachers as well as teachers who are using a different system and they need to kind of be retrained or refocused. And then there's the larger group that isn't using any learning management system. He can chunk it out to say, yeah, in year two, we'll increase, again, please don't quote me on these numbers, because I don't know if they're good numbers, but in the first year, we'll increase the number of users from 40% to 60%. Maybe that's reasonable in year one, and then in year two, I mean, I'll leave that up to Steve to put that plan together and put it out to you. But let's say year two, he says we can add another 30% plus new teachers that we hire. And then in the last year, darn well, the last year are going to be the most resistant adopters.
Yeah.
Then we'll pick up the final 20% plus new teachers. And then, okay, 3 years, we got a plan to get from 40%, to 100% for laughs. I'd see that's kind of how it would chunk out.
Okay.
So when do you think we could see the plan from him? I mean, we have mid-year check-in on our goals, so I'm just wondering what we're gonna.
Well, I think,
Early fall, maybe.
we probably could. I want to talk to Steve, because again, I don't want to make a commitment that he knows he can't meet, although I don't think it would be a big deal, but, we could shoot for, maybe November, by no later than November 1st.
Yeah.
Again, and we may want to come back to you and tweak that, because maybe that's reasonable, or maybe he says, we can do this by October. I've got it half written. Okay, well, I don't want to wait just for the sake of waiting. I want to make sure it's well written before we roll it out just to meet an artificial deadline.
Okay, now the second goal. I mean, to me, this one is also a lot different than kind of what we had talked about. I don't know if that's what everybody else's memory was,
Yeah.
if it was just mine.
No, it was different from mine as well.
Because what I thought we had talked about, I mean, I said in the email, was, trying to get a percentage or every staff member trained in some form. I understand your response about what does that training look like? Is it just any kind of training, or it's going to be different for different staff members, or how much training?
I'll give you an example. If we said train 100% of the staff, train 90% of the staff, and we hold a superintendent's conference day, and we have a speaker, a series of workshops on this topic for that day, I could probably say, yeah, we got 90% of our people trained.
Yeah.
If that meets the definition of training.
Right.
That was my point in the email, was it depends on what we mean by training. I mean, I'll give you another example that would run counter to that. We're bringing on ruler in the high school, okay? That training is going to last the whole year. So we're not going to have 100% of the high school staff trained by December 1st or whatever, unless you mean training being this. That's a whole different kind of training. It's much more intensive. That by its nature, it's got to be longer, because that's how the program is set up. So that's why that's a slippery slope for me, because I don't know what you mean by, do you mean any kind of training? Then we could probably do a pretty high percentage in year one.
Yeah, I mean, I see the dilemma with that. I know when we were talking about it, it was, we were talking about ruler in the high school, and I think 4 or 5 teachers are being trained, and then they're supposed to train
Train the
others.
following year,
You know,
right.
And then we talked about, you
Right.
know, but all the staff needs to have some training, and it'll look different in the different buildings, so I don't,
Mhm.
I don't.
I'm only saying that it's problematic to pick a percentage. I mean, we could pick one out of thin air.
Right, which we don't wanna.
You know, I mean, we could do that, but is that realistic? And depending on what you mean by training, it could be doable or not doable. If by that number we mean everybody, every teacher gets some training, we could probably do 85%, because there might be 15% absenteeism. I mean, you know, people are sick, people are, I wouldn't want to say 100% in year one. I mean, we might get close to it.
And we were talking about not just teachers, I mean, definitely.
Oh, yeah, I'm talking about school
Yeah.
staff, not just teachers, absolutely. So that amps the number up,
Yeah,
but I'm not saying it's out of the question.
So I always struggle with this goal because it is so hard to quantify things, but Marvin mentioned that he was going to survey again, not this coming school year, but the following school year.
Correct.
Can we tie some kind of benchmark to the areas that we thought needed improvement in that new study? Like, because we've done this for 2 or 3 years, right?
Mhm.
And those 3 areas, and I forget which ones they were, that everybody scored low on, or
There were like 3
Oh,
areas.
that's
or-
right.
right.
Yeah,
So
the
can we say
social
by
media,
impro-
the
With
safety.
the goal of improving that by
improving those areas.
those areas for the next survey. Like,
Right.
just so we have something that's measurable. I mean,
Right.
the timing of asking those questions in the survey, I think,
Yeah.
can skew the results, right? So if there was a shooting that day or that week that you asked the survey, your numbers
Sure.
are gonna be skewed
There
than
was.
if there
I
wasn't.
think,
Well,
yeah,
there
there
was.
was,
There was.
actually,
Yes.
when they did
Right.
the survey.
So, I mean, they should be pretty easy to beat then, basically, right? I
Well,
mean.
No, because there could be another.
Right.
The students are
Or
all
this.
smart.
No, but my point is that at least it's something that's measurable, that we know
Yeah.
we've got areas that we need improvement. I think we've been focusing on those with some of the initiatives that each building has been doing, but, let's make it, part of the goal is to improve those 3 things, right? And really address them for the following survey.
That makes sense.
I think especially the social and civic learning.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot to raise my hand. Just because social media and the sense of social emotional security can be so much more influenced by what's happening in the news. But social and civic learning, that's
Yeah.
not gonna necessarily be,
And there was quite a few sub-questions that made up that category, so I think
Yeah.
we could really dive in
Mhm.
and look at it a little bit more deeply and come up with a.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I'm sorry, I'm like putting my back to you guys because all the conversations come, and that's why I don't really like this setup. It's as good as we have
Yeah.
until we get back in the library next month. But, so I'm hearing the possibility of, or a focus of this year's 1920 goal in this area being to provide training, maybe training is not the best word, but to provide training to the staff, teaching staff, non-instructional staff, that will have the result of an improvement in those 3 areas for the 2021 survey. Because we're not going to be surveying, we're not planning on surveying again until the following fall. I mean, is that something that,
I think it's
Well, I
measurable.
think you could
then, right?
take training off it. I mean, I think if the goal is just to improve these scores, it really doesn't matter how you go about that, whether it's training or
Okay.
something else.
yeah,
That could be up to you. I think tying
Mhm.
training to it then, well, what if the training doesn't help these areas? So I don't think you have to
Yeah.
even put that in there. The goal is just to improve these areas that we know we
Mhm.
struggle in.
however we get there, yeah.
Right, however you get there depends on the building
Okay.
principals, whoever.
yeah,
And a lot of that they're doing anyway, right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
instead of putting a percentage around it, you've got
Yeah.
an action item to shoot against.
yeah.
That's a great idea.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You gonna take
Yeah,
a
I-
crack at it for us?
Well, I will.
Maybe Marvin can help crack.
Just,
right?
I mean, I think it's
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
big, just basically, taking the climate
Yeah.
scores and increasing those.
I think the
However
easy,
that-
I think the easy part is writing the goal. The tough part is actually
Yeah.
the lift of improving those scores, but that's okay, that gives us something
Well, I
to,
mean, I think,
Go for
you've
it.
got to hope that what we're doing for, putting ruler in and putting all those things in is actually
Yeah.
going to help people feel
Absolutely.
secure and empowered
Yeah.
and stuff, and you should be able to survey that,
Mhm.
right?
Well, it makes sense with the goals we've had, it all, it
Yeah.
kind of,
It's a
it makes
capstone.
sense as the next step,
Yeah.
right? We take the data, this is where we know we have areas. It's same in all
well,
the-
to be honest, the things that we're doing now are the result of
Right.
the last survey,
Yeah.
Well, let's see how we did.
yeah.
Right.
Okay. So my next question then is, in terms of our process here, do you want me to wordsmith those two goals as we've discussed just now, and bring them back to you for approval at your September 10th meeting? Do you want to approve something conceptually tonight? And again, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but
Can we approve the two goals as are written that we like, and then adopt a third one in September after you've worked on it?
I mean,
Do
you
two
can
at
do
least,
it.
because then
You
at
can do
least-
anything you want.
I mean,
really.
so at least then, we have two and they're out there, otherwise we're waiting till what, the third, September 13th? When is it, September
10th
10th?
is our next meeting.
So I'm just wondering if at least getting two.
Matt was going to say something, I think, I'm sorry.
To me, it seems cleanest to do it all together if there's no pressing time frame, as opposed to put two up there, then add a third,
Mhm.
but.
The thing is, when are we usually talk about goals at open houses. I saw an open house before that, I was looking at those dates, like there is, first open house is on the 11th.
Well, just
So
to let
we
you
do have
know,
time. We do have time.
because those of you, most of you, a few of you anyway, know by now, and what I do is like, I started working on it today. I started working on the September 10th agenda. Okay, so I roll it over, because most things that we do are cyclical. They happen pretty much the same time every year, all right? So I happened to look at last year's meeting agenda from September 11th, and that's when we adopted our board goals last year.
Right, then let them,
So,
then
just to
let's,
see if we're on
let's,
the same
let's wait,
schedule.
we can, Mark.
I was gonna say, maybe we could give Joe some time to do wordsmithing on this one goal that we're talking about. And maybe between now and beginning of school, we could kind of, by email, give kind of a thumbs up that, yeah, that's okay. And then we can just go ahead and approve it at the next
Okay.
meeting rather than
Well, especially since
having another discussion.
Yeah,
we don't have, and I'm not complaining, but we don't have the luxury of a second meeting in August. I mean, we tried to do this with 3 meetings, given everybody's availability and whatnot. So, I mean, there's some time in my workflow that I could probably do that and get it out to you way before the meeting on September 10th. So at that point, it's just pretty much a slam dunk, like, don't come to the meeting on September 10th. If you have a problem with what we've wordsmithed, let me know beforehand, so we can still be doing that via email.
Right, the work's done before.
Yeah, exactly. I'm fine with that,
yeah,
if it's cool with you guys.
yeah, sounds good.
All right,
That's the plan.
all right, yeah, works for me.
Okay. Move on to good news.
Wasn't there something from Niche?
There was something that, yeah, we were in the.
We were in the-
somewhere.
there was-
Something
Something showed up on
teachers,
Twitter.
Or there was something we were listed.
You
Oh,
posted
the
something on
niche
Twitter.
thing that I
Yeah.
put on our,
Yeah.
on our Facebook page and our Twitter.
That was
Yeah.
new, right?
Yeah, I think we were, right,
38?
it was niche, no, we were 18th
Oh, 18th.
out of, I saw the article in an upstate newspaper, on Eclipse, and that listed the 50 top upstate schools. And of course, it's like everything north of Westchester, okay? And we were 18th on that list. We were, except for New Paltz, which I think was 15th, we were the highest in our county easily and in most of this region, okay, for whatever it's worth. I want to put way too much stock in these kinds of things.
Always nice to be mentioned.
Then, yeah, no, absolutely. You know, what do they say, no publicity is bad, all publicity is good publicity. So anyway, the one that ran in the Daily Voice, which is that online thing that I get on my feed, just focused on like the area school districts. And we were like, of the area school districts that they focused on, we had the highest ranking. To be honest with you, New Paltz had a higher ranking than we did, but that's not how they wrote the article, and they used our picture of our little sign out front as the banner of the article, and fine, we'll take it. Well, I consider them part of our area, but whatever, I'm not complaining. So yes, that was good news, thank you. I'm trying to think if I had something else. Well, I will say, the capital project is moving along. We will be in the library next time. They've done a ton of work. A lot of it is stuff you can't see, you know, plumbing underneath the floors and, you know, stuff that you'll never see. I heard a radio call today that the generator arrived today. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't know.
Yeah, Mark radioed out to Sheldon, your generator's here. Doesn't mean it's gonna be hooked up like right today, but I don't know. It's here, so I didn't think
stay at school longer.
I'd bring all the elementary kids over here too if we're out of town. But you know, like with any capital project, there are issues. There are always going to be issues, but nothing like horrible, awful. You know, it's a couple of what do we have on here tonight? Change orders. You know, stuff comes up. You find stuff that you didn't know about, and they're putting up the. I took a little tour with Sheldon today down to the high school gym. They're putting up the soundproofing stuff there to reduce some of the reverberation in there. So
that's
that'll
gonna be nice.
that'll be ready before volleyball season starts, much less you know, basketball season. So that's moving right along. Do you think of anything else that's?
Strip the floors.
Oh, yeah.
They stripped the wood floor in there, which is good. We didn't go through it,
Yeah.
so we don't have to replace the
Yeah,
flooring,
yeah.
so that was good to know, so that was good.
Yeah, I walked past there a couple of days ago, and I went back, I said to Sheldon, Sheldon, why did they put this white plastic thing on the floor? Because they already did all the ceiling and new grids and what. I said, why did they put a white thing over that whole? He says, come with me. He took me down there. Of course, it's all closed up and taped up. He took me in. It wasn't white. It was the color of the wood when they stripped everything off it. It looked white.
It's not yellow.
No, it's not yellow at all. So our big conversation today was do we paint the keys yellow with the jump circle yellow and the hawk's head purple? Or do we paint the keys purple and the center circle purple with a yellow hawk's head? Now Sheldon's rationale is, and then he took me down to the old gym, well, the new gym actually, the high school gym, and he said, look at this, and he showed me the yellow jump circle, which now is what, about 12, 13, 14 years old. It's not pristine like it was not too long ago. He said, this looks awful. This needs to be repainted. The yellow shows the dirt and the wear. He says, I think we should do purple in the jump circle and purple the center circle and a gold hawk. Right? So, well, you know, you make a point.
That's practical.
So anyway, but those are good problems to have, right? Okay, so we're moving along. Yeah, it's.
The big project right now is the windows are being installed in the different various wings.
In the high school,
In the high school, the middle school, and the foam roofers have been up on top.
That started.
Repairing the roof, so. The bid for site work was published within the past couple of days, so hopefully within about another 2 weeks, we'll get good results.
We're hoping to do maybe some of that outside work this fall,
Especially
maybe.
this one over here. I'm trying to get this one over here started.
So,
That would be good.
Good.
so that's good news.
Good
Things are
news.
moving along well, and
Great,
we'll keep her going.
all right.
Okay.
Any old business?
I don't. I have an other, but I don't have an old business.
I have a question.
Sure.
Where do we stand on implementing a questionnaire in the middle and high school for students?
I've already talked to John and Ed about that before school was over.
Right.
I gave them copies of the one I'd gotten from Brett. I said, this is obviously elementary-ish, so they both indicated that they thought that was probably a good idea.
But it would seem like it needs to be rolled out
Yeah.
kind of soon. So we're
There's
we're
a
on.
ton of time
it's-
left.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. I just figured I'd check
Yeah.
in because last year I remember we talked about
Yeah.
it and then things got too
Well,
far along. And
yes,
we missed the
yes,
window. So I
yeah.
just wanted to bring it up.
We're meeting
Great.
next Wednesday or Thursday, so that's on my agenda for that,
Awesome.
so.
I guess just to make sure everybody saw the new, Joe did the new board committee
Yep.
under
Yeah.
the new
Yeah,
dates
it's
and
very
agreement.
exciting.
Okay. Public comment, we still have no public, so move on to other.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to mention to the board, Steve Boucher was approached a couple of days ago by the AD at Pine Plains. I'm going to choke up. And they have one boy and one girl who want to run cross-country. They apparently don't have a cross-country team there. Because we have, I think, 6 kids already signed up, boys, that is, signed up for cross-country. It can't be a merged team, because 6 is enough for us to run our own team. So they will only let you merge if the schools don't have enough to compete by themselves, okay? So we do. So what they do in that situation is these 2 kids from Pine Plains would do what the section and the state, I think, calls shadowing. So they would actually run for Pine Plains in a Pine Plains uniform, but at all of our meets. And our coach would be their surrogate coach. I mean, it's not gonna cost us anything one way or the other. They would have to transport their kids over here and back every day, you know, for practice, just like we do the other way for football. They would have, if they're interested in this, they would have to appoint our coach as their coach of record just for liability purposes. I would propose, and I wouldn't even suggest, given the relationship we've developed, to even have a conversation about, well, should we charge them 1/7 of the coach's salary? I think that's ridiculous. We're going to have to pay that coach's salary regardless. I say let them come on. Those kids benefit.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt us. I mean, what's not to like about it? So just giving you a heads up, that is not something that as a board you have to approve. You would have to approve a merger. You do not approve a shadow. So it might happen without your taking action on it. So I'm just giving you a heads up. I'll let you know if it happens. So at the first cross-country meet, a kid in a Pine Plains uniform comes running by and people are saying, what the heck's that kid doing out here? You'll know. It may not happen. Just because they asked us doesn't mean that they'll follow through on it. But I'll let you know if it does happen, but it might happen. And assuming nobody has an objection, I think it's a great idea, so.
How do they go to the meets?
Just
They have to bus them to the meets separately?
Either they have to bus them separately or they have to bus them here to catch our bus and then go to the meets. And
Was that they
they'll-
bus them here and then they get on the bus
Well,
to
it
go?
depends on where the
They
meet
bus
is.
separately.
Oh,
That's
oh,
right.
oh.
And let's say the meet is in Ellenville, they'd probably bring a bus over here at, 8 o'clock on Saturday morning, and they'd get on the bus with our team, go to Ellenville, and then, rinse and repeat, going the other way. So, but it'd be legal. They wouldn't be able to score points for our school, but they could score individual points, so one of them could go to states. If they had a cross-country runner who was really fantastic, that kid could go to states representing Pine Plains.
That's typically why you do it, right, is to go to states.
Yeah,
Or they just want.
or just want to participate and there's no program there.
Yeah. but
That's really
look at-
whatever they want to do.
I mean,
It's
if
fine.
we can help them out in this way.
Yeah,
that sounds
I agree.
good for
Okay,
them.
just more of an FYI than anything.
I think also under other, two new board members, Matt's here today, but for open house, typically a board member speaks at open house, at each of the open house for just a moment. So the dates, except the high school, are on the back of the sheet here, so if people can look and see which ones they're able to do. I guess I could send out an email with dates, but if you know which ones you can do, we can start putting together a list.
I'll send out an email with all 4 dates, because there's high school, middle school, and 2 elementary schools.
High school's probably October.
Yeah, it's usually later than the others. But I'll send out an email anyway, so everybody, including Jackie, gets that, and we need all 4 of them covered. And it really is only
30 seconds.
yeah, it's brief because those nights are pretty packed. The building principals don't want somebody up there yakking for 20 minutes. They gotta get rolling, so. But it's a nice opportunity to connect with people, to invite them to attend our meetings, to bring thoughts and ideas forward, let them know what our goals are for the year, and then that's it. You're pretty much out of there. So give it some thought. I'll send you the dates tomorrow.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, good. Glad you remembered that.
Any other?
I don't. Nope.
Okay, move to action items. Does anyone want to remove anything from the consent agenda? Okay. I have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the consent agenda.